Hello everyone and welcome back to another ASMR true crime story time. The case that I'm going to be talking about today is the case of a serial killer. William Macdonald was an English serial killer who was responsible for the deaths of 5 people in the Australian states of Queensland and New South Wales between 1961 and 1962. William was born Alan Ginsberg in Liverpool, England in 1924. At the age of 19 in 1943, William enlisted in the army and transferred to the Lancashire Fusiliers. One night, while in the army, William was raped in an air raid shelter by one of his corporals. This experience traumatised him and the thought preyed on his mind for the rest of his life. Discharged from the army in 1947, he was diagnosed as having schizophrenia and committed for several months to a mental asylum where daily he was treated with electroconvulsive therapy. William changed his name, then emigrated from England to Canada in 1949 and then moved on to Australia in 1955. Shortly after his arrival, he was arrested and charged for touching a detective's penis in a public toilet in Adelaide. For this, he was placed on a 2-year good behaviour bond. After moving to Ballarat, William then moved to Sydney in 1961 and started work as a construction worker. He found accommodation in East Sydney, where he became well known in the parks and the public toilets that were surreptitiously meeting places for homosexual men. The murders began in Brisbane in 1961. William befriended a 69-year-old man named Amos Hurst outside the Roma Street railway station. After a long drinking session at one of the local pubs, they went back to Hurst's apartment where they continued consuming alcohol. When Hurst became intoxicated, William began to strangle him. Hurst was so intoxicated that he did not realise what was happening and eventually he began to hemorrhage. Blood poured from his mouth and onto William's hands. William then punched Hurst in the face, ultimately killing him. William then proceeded to place Hurst on his bed, where he took off his trousers and shoes and pulled the sheets up over Hurst's head and tucked them in all around the sides. William then waited there a while, then he turned off the lights and he quietly left the apartment. 5 days later, he found Hurst's name in a newspaper obituary column. It said Hurst had died accidentally. William was very surprised and had been in terror of the police arresting him for murder, even though he was certain that no one had seen him leave Hurst's room. On the 4th of June 1961, police were summoned to the Sydney Domain Baths. A man's nude corpse had been found, savagely stabbed over 30 times and with the genitalia completely severed from his body. Alfred Reginald Greenfield became the second victim killed by the killer that was soon to be dubbed the Mutilator. Greenfield, 41, had been sitting on a park bench in Green Park just across the road from St Vincent's Hospital in Darlinghurst. William offered Greenfield a drink and lured him to the nearby Domain Baths on the pretext of providing him with more alcohol. William waited until Greenfield fell asleep, then he removed his knife from 57-year-old male who was repeatedly stabbed and mutilated, and his body was found in a public toilet at Moore Park. On this night, William was walking down South Dowling Street where he met Cobban. William lured his victim to Moore Park and drank beer with him in a public toilet. Just before the attack started, William put on his plastic raincoat. Cobban was sitting on the toilet seat when William, using an uppercut motion, struck Cobban in the neck with a knife, severing his jugular vein. Blood splattered all over William's arms, face and his plastic raincoat. Cobban did try to defend himself by raising his arms, but William continued to stab his victim multiple times, covering the toilet cubicle with blood. William then severed the victim's genitals, placed them in a plastic bag along with his knife, and departed the scene. On the way home, William washed the blood off of his hands and face. On the 31st of March 1962, in suburban Darlinghurst, New South Wales, the mortally wounded Frank Gladstone McLean was found by a man who was walking with his wife and a young child. He was the victim of an unfinished assault that was committed by William. The man found McLean, who was still breathing but bleeding heavily, and went to the police. On this day, William brought a knife from a sports store in Sydney. That night, William left the Oxford Hotel in Darlinghurst and followed McLean down Book Street past the local police station. William initiated conversation with McLean and suggested they have a drinking session around the corner in Borg Lane. As they entered Borg Lane, William plunged his knife into McLean's throat. McLean tried to fight off the attack, but he was too intoxicated to do so. He was then stabbed again in the face and punched, which forced him off balance. The assault was interrupted by a young family approaching. William hid himself on hearing the voices and the sound of a baby's cry. Once the man and his family had left, William returned to the barely alive McLean, pulled him further into the lane and stabbed him again. A total of 6 stab wounds were inflicted. He then pulled down McLean's trousers, sliced off his genitals and put them into a plastic bag, which he took home and disposed of the next day. The police at one stage thought that the killer could have been a deranged surgeon because of the manner in which McLean's genitals were removed, and it seemed to be done by someone with years of surgical experience. Doctors at one stage found themselves under investigation. After being dismissed from his job at the local post office, where he had been hired as a letter sorter under the assumed name of Alan Edward Brennan, William went into business for himself. He purchased a mixed business store on Burwood Road in Concord, again under the assumed name of Brennan. Here he intended to sell sandwiches and small goods, living in rooms above the store. He actually lived there for only about a week after paying the purchase deposit. On the night of Saturday the 6th of June 1962, William went to a wine saloon in Pitt Street, Sydney, where he met 35-year-old Patrick Joseph Hackett. He was a thief and a derelict who had just recently been released from prison. They went back to William's new residence, where they continued to drink alcohol. After a short period, Hackett fell asleep on the floor. William then got out a boning knife that he used in his delicatessen. He stabbed Hackett in the neck, the blow passing straight through. After the first blow, Hackett woke up and tried to shield himself, pushing the knife back into William's other hand and cutting it severely. himself lying next to the victim's body, covered in sticky, drying blood. The pools of blood had soaked through the floorboards and almost onto the counter in his shops downstairs. He cleaned himself and went to a hospital to have the wound in his hand stitched. He told the doctor that he had cut himself while in his shop. After cleaning up the blood, William then dragged Hackett's corpse underneath his shop. Believing the police would soon come looking for his victim, he quickly fled to Brisbane. 3 weeks later, neighbours noticed a putrid smell coming from the shop, and they called the health department, which in turn called the police. On the 20th of November 1962, police discovered the rotting corpse, which was too badly decomposed to be identified. An autopsy determined that the body was of someone in their 40s, which tallied with the records of the missing shop owner, Brennan, which is Macdonald's alias. In late July, the police had still made no connection between the case and the 3 previous mutilator killings, and had profiled the killer as operating in Sydney's inner eastern suburbs, which were many miles distant from Concord. After investigations, the victim was incorrectly identified as Brennan, and a notice was published in a newspaper obituary column. This was read by his former workmates at the local post office, who attended a small memorial service that was conducted by a local funeral director. At this time, William was living in Brisbane, and then he moved to New Zealand, believing that the police would still be looking for him. He felt the need to kill again, but for some reason, he had to return to Sydney to do it. According to returning to Sydney, he met former workmate John McCartney, who said, quote, "I believed you had died," end quote, at which William replied, "Leave me alone," and ran away, travelling to Melbourne soon after. McCartney went straight to the police. At first they did not believe him, and they accused him of having had too much to drink, and he was told to go home and sleep it off. They even said that he was crazy. He went back again the next day and tried to explain what had happened, but still they didn't believe him. This persuaded McCarthy to go to the Daily Mirror newspaper, where he spoke to crime reporter Joe Morris. McCarthy explained how he bumped into the supposed-to-be dead Brennan. The reporter saw the account as credible and filed a story under the headline, "Case of the Walking Corpse." Publication forced the police to exhume the corpse. The fingerprints identified the body as belonging to Hackett and not William. Closer examination found that the body had several stab wounds and mutilation of the penis and testicles, potentially linking the crime to the notorious mutilator. The Sydney police obtained an identity kit picture of William, which was circulated to every newspaper in the nation. William had taken a job on the Melbourne Railways being hired as David Allen. Even though he tried to disguise himself by dyeing his hair and growing a moustache, he was instantly recognised by his workmates. Melbourne police arrested him as he collected his pay for that week. Under questioning, William readily admitted to the killings, blaming them on an irresistible urge to kill. He claimed he was the victim of rape as a teenager and had to disempower the victims chosen at random. A man with schizophrenia, William said that he heard voices in his head telling him that his victims were the corporal who had raped him as a teenager. He was charged with 4 counts of murder and was committed for trial on the 15th of August 1963. The trial then began in September 1963 and was one of the nation's most sensational trials. William pleaded not guilty on the grounds of insanity and testified in great detail to the gruesome murders. He told the court of how blood had sprayed over his raincoat as he castrated his victims, put their private parts into plastic bags and took them home. He even told the court what he did with the genitals once he got home. Some jurors fainted and had to be taken from the court. The jury chose to ignore overwhelming evidence for its sanity in handing down a guilty verdict, which amazed expert psychiatrists. Before passing sentence, Justice McLennan said that this was the most barbaric